writing it down feels weird, like I'm tempting fate. But maybe someone out there will read this and understand what I went through. Or maybe it'll just sound like paranoia. This happened in the fall of 2019, when I was living just outside of Dayton, Ohio. I had a small apartment near the edge of town, close to a wooded area and an old industrial park that had been mostly abandoned for years. It wasn't the nicest neighborhood, but the rent was cheap and I was in between jobs, so I couldn't be picky. One night, around mid-October, I was walking back from the gas station a few blocks away. It was a little after midnight, and the air had that crisp bite of early fall. The streets were mostly empty, except for a few parked cars and the sound of leaves scraping across the pavement. That's when I first saw him. A man in a bright yellow hoodie, standing under the broken streetlight near the old factory entrance. His hood was pulled tight around his face, and he was standing perfectly still, like a statue. What made it worse was that he was facing directly toward me. I slowed my walk for just a second, trying not to stare, but I couldn't help glancing. The way the shadows hit, I couldn't make out his face at all, just this dark void beneath the hood. I crossed the street to avoid him, quickening my pace. My apartment wasn't far, maybe another block or two, and I told myself it was nothing, probably just some guy waiting for a ride or maybe homeless, looking for somewhere to stay warm. But the weirdest part, when I glanced back a moment later, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound of someone moving away, just gone. I shook it off, convinced I was being dramatic, and went home. But that was only the beginning. The next few nights, I kept seeing him. Not constantly, but enough that I started noticing a pattern. I'd be coming home late or taking the trash out, and I'd catch a glimpse of that yellow hoodie somewhere nearby. Sometimes standing across the street, sometimes at the corner by the woods. Always far enough away that I couldn't see his face, but close enough that I knew it was the same guy. At first, I thought maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he lived nearby. But then I realized he was only ever around when I was outside. One night, I tried to test it. I sat in my living room with the lights off, just peeking through the blinds, waiting. It was around 2 a.m. when I finally spotted him, standing on the opposite sidewalk, motionless again, facing my building. I don't know how long he stood there because I forced myself away from the window, heart racing so fast I thought I might pass out. Things escalated after that. One evening I was cooking dinner when I heard faint tapping on my window. My apartment was on the second floor, so at first I thought maybe it was just branches. But when I pulled back the curtain, there was no tree. Just the man in the yellow hoodie, standing below in the courtyard, staring up at me. This time I could see just a bit of his face beneath the hood. Pale skin, lips pressed into a thin line. His eyes, though, they didn't look right. Too dark, like he didn't have pupils. I ducked away immediately, hands trembling so badly I thought I might pass out. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined him climbing the stairs, standing outside my door. A week later, something happened that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. I was woken up at around 3:30 a.m. by the sound of someone jiggling my doorknob. Slow at first, then more forcefully. My apartment wasn't in the best area, so I thought maybe it was a break-in. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept near my bed and crept toward the door. When I looked through the peephole, my blood ran cold. It was him, the yellow hoodie. He was standing there, one hand on the knob, the other pressed flat against the door. His head was tilted, like he was listening to something inside. I froze. I wanted to scream, to call the cops, but I couldn't move. After what felt like forever, he stopped, slowly leaned forward until his hood brushed against the peephole, and just stood there. I backed away, holding the bat so tightly my knuckles went white.
Eventually, and I still don't know how long it took, the sound stopped. When I finally got the courage to look again, he was gone. I didn't sleep at all that night. The following day, I went to the landlord and begged to change the locks. He looked at me like I was crazy, but agreed to do it. I even thought about calling the police, but what was I supposed to say? There's a guy in a yellow hoodie who stands outside my window and jiggles my doorknob? They'd laugh me out of the station. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched constantly. 2 nights later, it got worse. I had just come back from visiting my mom, who lived across town. It was late, maybe 1 a.m., and I was dead tired. As I pulled into the parking lot, my headlights swept across the trees near the abandoned factory. And there he was. Not standing this time, but crouched, low to the ground, his hands pressed into the dirt, head tilted unnaturally towards me, like some kind of animal waiting to pounce. The second the light hit him, he bolted, not away, but directly into the woods at a speed that didn't look human. I sat frozen in my car for several minutes before forcing myself inside. That was the first time I realized this might not be a normal person at all. I started researching online, trying to figure out if anyone else in my area had reported something similar. Stalker cases, break-ins, strange figures, nothing came up. But one night, while scrolling through old local forums, I stumbled across a thread from 2012. Someone had posted about a man in a yellow hoodie seen near the same industrial park. The post described him as too fast, too quiet, and always watching. The last comment in the thread simply said, "Don't look at him. Don't let him know you noticed." That was the night I realized I might not survive this if I stayed.
When I finally made it home that night, I didn't even take off my jacket. I went straight into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and tried to steady my shaking hands. My reflection in the microwave door looked pale, sickly, like I hadn't slept in days. But the truth was, I hadn't. Ever since that shift, I hadn't gotten a proper night's sleep. The knocking never really stopped. Sometimes it came while I was still inside the building during my rounds. Sometimes it followed me into the parking lot. And sometimes, worst of all, it followed me home. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and from somewhere in the walls of my apartment, I'd hear it. Tap, tap, tap. Faint at first, then sharper. Always in threes. I tried to tell myself it was the pipes or the neighbors, but the rhythm was too deliberate, too purposeful. The worst night happened about a week later. I'd taken an overnight shift again because another guard called out. Around 2 a.m., I was doing my routine check on the 3rd floor. Everything was quiet, empty. I walked past the old offices, clicking my flashlight against the peeling paint and dusty plaques. That's when I saw her. Not in the dark this time, not in the corner of my eye. She was standing directly at the end of the hallway, under the flickering fluorescent bulb. A girl, pale skin, dark hair matted to her face, wearing a hospital gown that looked old, stained, and yellowed with age. She was barefoot, and her head was tilted slightly, unnaturally. I froze. My throat locked up. I couldn't move. She lifted her hand, slow, jerky, and pressed her finger to her lips, like she was telling me to stay quiet. Then, without warning, she turned and walked into one of the old patient rooms. I didn't even think. I bolted. I sprinted down the hall, past the elevators, down the stairwell, and straight into the security office, slamming the door behind me. I stayed there until sunrise, refusing to step foot outside that room. When morning came, I gathered enough courage to check the room where she disappeared. I half expected to find nothing, but when I pushed the door open, the air was freezing. My breath came out in white clouds. The room was stripped bare except for one thing. An old, rusted hospital bed against the far wall. And on the mattress, in the thin layer of dust, was the imprint of a body.
After that night, I quit. I told the building manager I couldn't work there anymore. No explanation. He didn't even seem surprised, just nodded and muttered something about people not lasting long on overnights. But even after I left, the knocking followed me. It got worse. One night, I woke up to it coming from my bedroom closet. 3 sharp knocks. I stared at the door, heart hammering in my chest, and I swear I saw the knob twitch. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later, packed my car in the middle of the night, and drove across town just to get away from it. For a while, it seemed to help. The knocking stopped, I started sleeping again. Life almost felt normal. Until last month. I was walking home from the store, arms full of groceries, when I passed by a dark alley between 2 old buildings. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing there, a girl, pale, dark hair, watching me. I didn't stop, didn't look directly at her, but I knew it was the same girl. I don't tell the story to scare people for fun. I tell it because I don't know what she wants. And if she can follow me this far, into different homes, into different parts of the city, then I know she's not bound to that hospital. She's bound to me. And every time I hear that knocking now, whether it's in my walls or on my windows, I wonder if the next time I look, she won't just be watching. She'll be inside.
I've lived in rural Ohio my entire life. My family owns a small patch of farmland just outside a quiet town, the kind of place where people still wave when you pass by and kids ride their bikes down cracked country roads in the summer. For the most part, life here is slow, simple, and safe. But there's something about living out here, away from the streetlights with long stretches of darkness between houses, that can make the nights feel endless. If you've ever stood outside at 2 in the morning in the country, you know what I mean. The silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels wrong, like the night is listening. I didn't used to think much of it, but something happened in the summer of 2016 that changed the way I see this place forever. Something that made me leave my bedroom curtains shut every single night. It started small. One night, around 1:30 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. No noise, no nightmare, just a jolt awake, like my body knew something my mind didn't. I rolled over and glanced toward the window. That's when I saw it. A shadow. Not just the vague shape of a tree or the outline of something far away. No, this was close. Someone or something was standing right outside my bedroom window. I froze. My room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon spilling through the glass, but I could make out the silhouette clearly. Tall, unmoving, facing directly toward me. I didn't breathe, I didn't move. I just stared. After what felt like forever, I blinked. And when I opened my eyes, it was gone. I convinced myself it was a trick of the light, maybe my half-asleep brain messing with me. I pulled the covers over my head and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I went outside to check. My bedroom window's only about 6 feet off the ground, but there's a flower bed beneath it. Nothing looked disturbed. No footprints, no broken branches. I felt stupid for even looking. But that night, it happened again. I woke up, same time, almost exactly 1:30 a.m., and saw the shadow again. This time, closer, pressed against the glass. I remember the outline of its head most vividly. Too narrow, too long. And then it did something I will never forget. It tapped the glass. A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I bolted upright, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The shadow didn't move, didn't flinch. It just stood there, hand against the window. I wanted to scream for my parents, but my voice caught in my throat. After what felt like hours, I blinked. And once again, it was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I told my dad. He brushed it off, said it was probably a raccoon or some other animal. But I knew what I saw. That shadow wasn't an animal. It looked human, but not quite. I started sleeping with the blinds shut, thinking that would help. It didn't, because the third night, it came back. This time, it wasn't outside the window. It was inside the room. I woke up to the sound of breathing. Heavy, slow, steady breathing, not mine. I froze and kept my eyes shut tight. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I'd pass out. I told myself it wasn't real. I told myself if I didn't look, it would go away. But then I heard it move. A faint shuffle, just a few steps, and then the floorboard creaked right next to my bed. I snapped my eyes open and saw nothing. My room was empty, but my window blinds, they were open. After that, I begged my parents to let me sleep in their room. They let me stay the first night, but when nothing happened, my dad told me to stop being paranoid. So I started staying awake as late as I could. Coffee, soda, anything to keep my eyes open. But no matter what, at some point my body would give in, and I'd wake up around 1:30 a.m., and it would be there, always, watching. Sometimes outside, sometimes inside, always at the edge of my vision. One night, I finally tried to fight back. I had a baseball bat under my bed. When I woke up and saw the shadow at the window again, I leapt out of bed, grabbed the bat, and yanked the blinds open. There was nothing there, just my reflection staring back at me in the glass. But then I noticed something that froze me in place. My reflection wasn't holding a bat. That was the night I broke. I didn't sleep in my room again for weeks. I camped out on the couch in the living room, TV on, every light in the house blazing. And for a while it worked. No shadows, no breathing, no tapping. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all. Until one morning, my mom called me into the kitchen. She was pale, holding something in her hand. It was a scrap of paper, dirty and crumpled, that she said she'd found wedged in the windowsill of my bedroom. On it, in shaky handwriting, were 3 words. Let me in. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the low static hum, the faint crunch of gravel, the sound of someone dragging their feet outside. At one point, I even thought I heard whispering right by my bedroom window. But when I got up and checked, there was nothing, just the dark outline of the highway stretching into nowhere. The next morning, I tried convincing myself it was all just paranoia. Long drives mess with your head, right? But my body disagreed. My skin felt tight, goosebumps prickled along my arms, and no amount of coffee could shake the deep unease sitting in my gut. That evening, I told myself I'd test it, prove it was nothing. I drove back to the same stretch of highway, right around the spot where my car had first stalled. The sun had just gone down, and the last traces of daylight left the sky painted in bruised purple and red. I slowed down as I reached the old mile marker. And that's when it happened again. My car shuddered once, then twice before stalling completely. The engine cut out and the dashboard lights flickered before going black. My stomach dropped. The silence hit like a punch. Out here, there's no traffic, no civilization, just the wind brushing against the dry weeds. I tried the ignition 3 times. Nothing. And then, the static. It came from the radio, even though the car was completely dead. The speakers hissed softly, like 1,000 whispers tangled together. I leaned in, and I swear to God, beneath the static, I heard my name. Not once, several times. Tom. The sound was faint, drawn out like someone trying to drag the word out of the static itself. That's when I saw it. The figure. Standing about 20 feet ahead of my car, just off the edge of the highway. At first I thought it was a man. A tall, thin man, standing impossibly still. His head was tilted to the side, watching me. My first instinct was to lock the doors. My hands were shaking as I reached for the switch. But the moment I touched it, the figure stepped forward. Not fast, slow, too slow. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed up. I tried the ignition again, slamming my hand against the wheel. Nothing. The static only grew louder. The figure came closer. Now I could see more. His clothes looked torn, like he'd been out here for days. His skin was pale, too pale, like wax. And his eyes. God, his eyes were just dark pits. Empty. That broke me. I yanked at the door handle and stumbled out across the asphalt. My legs felt weak, like they weren't even my own, but fear pushed me forward. I didn't look back until I reached the ditch across the highway. And when I did, the figure was gone. Just gone. But the static, still there. Louder. I ran back to the car. The engine roared to life like nothing had ever happened. I drove home faster than I've ever driven in my life. The days after that, everything felt wrong. Lights flickered in my apartment at random hours. My phone would ring in the middle of the night, no caller ID, and when I picked up, I heard faint static. And sometimes, faintly, my name. I started researching. Turns out that stretch of highway has a history. People go missing there. Cars stall. A couple of truckers reported seeing a man waving for help, only for him to vanish when they stopped. Locals call it the stretch. Some even say it's cursed. I don't know if I believe in curses, but I do know this. Whatever I saw wasn't human. At least not anymore. The worst part? I keep hearing footsteps outside my apartment door at night. Slow, dragging footsteps. And every time I look through the peephole, there's no one there. I never believed in ghosts. My parents raised me to think logically, and I always brushed off anything paranormal as coincidence or imagination. But in 2017, something happened that changed the way I look at the world forever. I can't explain what I saw, and I'm not sure I want to. It started when I moved into a century-old boarding house in Denver. I was a graduate student at the time, broke, and the rent was ridiculously cheap. The house had been converted into small apartments, and I got the last unit, a studio tucked away on the second floor. The landlady, an elderly woman named Mrs. Haynes, handed me the keys with a strange warning. Don't mess with the locked door at the end of the hall. It's sealed for a reason. I laughed nervously, assuming she meant it was just a storage closet. But she looked me dead in the eye and repeated, "Leave it alone." The hallway was narrow and dimly lit, with peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards. At the far end stood a single, heavy wooden door, painted black. A rusted padlock sealed it shut, and something about it felt wrong. It wasn't like the other doors in the house. The first few weeks were fine. My unit was tiny but comfortable, and I spent most nights buried in research papers. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling whenever I walked past that locked door. Sometimes late at night, I swore I heard faint scratching noises from behind it. One night, around 2 a.m., I stepped out to grab water from the shared kitchen. The hallway was silent, except for a soft sound, like whispering. It was coming from the locked door. I froze, straining to listen. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, too many voices to make out any single word. Then, suddenly, the padlock rattled.
I bolted back into my unit, heart pounding, and shoved a chair under the doorknob. For the rest of the night, I sat awake, staring at my door, waiting for something to happen. The next morning, I confronted Mrs. Haynes. She frowned, but wasn't surprised. "You heard them, didn't you?" she asked. I admitted I had, though my logical brain tried to tell me it was just old pipes or drafty wood. But Mrs. Haynes shook her head slowly. "This house, it wasn't always a boarding home. In the 1920s, it was a halfway house for men coming out of prison, violent men. One night, 3 of them cornered a girl in that very room. She never came out. Police investigated, but no body was found. Just blood. They say her spirit never left. That's why I keep it locked." I wanted to laugh it off, but the seriousness in her voice made my stomach twist.
I don't usually share things like this, but I still can't explain what happened to me, and maybe writing it out will help. This was in 2014. I was driving cross-country from California to Ohio for a new job. I left late in the day and ended up somewhere in Kansas by nightfall. The highway was almost empty, and I was exhausted. I decided I needed to stop, even if it was just for a few hours of sleep. The first sign I saw for a motel was one of those old, flickering neon ones, just off a dark exit. It looked like something out of a movie, run down, barely lit, with an empty parking lot. But I was too tired to keep driving, so I pulled in. The office had that strange smell of dust and old cigarettes. A man in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, checked me in. He didn't smile, didn't make small talk, just slid me a key with a grunt. I remember his eyes felt off, like he was staring through me. My room was on the second floor. I dragged my suitcase up the creaky stairs, the wooden railing shaking under my hand. The hallway carpet was stained and damp in places, and there was this low humming sound, almost like an old vending machine struggling to stay alive. When I opened my door, my stomach dropped. The room felt wrong. I don't know how else to put it. The air was heavy, damp, and the walls had faint water stains creeping down from the ceiling. The bedspread looked decades old, patterned with faded flowers. But what really bothered me was the smell, like metal and mildew. I almost turned back and asked for a different room, but I was so drained. I told myself it was just an old building, and I tried to ignore it. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a sound. A slow, steady creak, like someone pacing above me. But there was no third floor. At first, I thought it might be the pipes, but then the creak stopped, and I heard something else. A whisper. It was faint, but definitely a voice. My whole body went rigid. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a man, speaking low, almost like he was right outside my door. I sat up, straining to hear. Then I noticed something that made my chest tighten. The shadow under my door. Someone was standing there. I froze. Whoever it was didn't knock, didn't move, just stood there. After what felt like forever, the shadow shifted, and I heard the faint sound of breathing. I wanted to grab my phone, but it was on the nightstand, too close to the door. I didn't dare move. Then, as suddenly as it started, the shadow was gone. I sat there, shaking, trying to convince myself it was just the motel manager doing rounds. But then, the whisper came again, this time from inside the room. My blood ran cold. I flicked on the lamp, but nothing was there. Just the peeling wallpaper and that heavy air pressing down on me. I grabbed my things, heart pounding, and bolted for the door.
When I yanked it open, the hallway was empty, silent. But the moment I stepped out, I noticed something. My door had been locked from the inside. I never heard it unlock. I ran to my car and didn't stop driving until the sun came up. I still don't know what happened that night. Maybe the manager was messing with me. Maybe I was so tired my brain was playing tricks. But deep down, I know what I felt wasn't just in my head. And sometimes, when I wake up at night, I still hear that whisper.